He looked at me like I was a bet he already knew he'd won. That kind of confidence doesn't belong to ordinary men. It belongs to people who've seen what power does and still crave more. The restaurant was almost empty that night. Soft jazz hummed beneath the sound of crystal glasses clinking. My feet ached inside the cheap heels management insisted we wear. But I smiled anyway. I always smiled because the tips depended on it. He was sitting in the far corner, surrounded by men in suits that probably cost more than my rent. The kind of men who laughed too softly and watched too closely. I didn't recognize him at first. Not until one of the busboys whispered his name. Luca Moretti. I'd heard it before, in the kind of late-night stories New Yorkers tell about people who own half the city but live in shadows. I told myself to just take the order and walk away. But when I set down the wine glass, he looked up at me with eyes the color of espresso and said, "I'll give you $7,000 if you speak to me in Italian." For a second, I thought he was joking. $7,000 that was nearly 2 months of rent. Or the medication my mother needed, but I couldn't afford. I laughed awkwardly. "I don't speak Italian, sir." He tilted his head slightly, amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's a shame. You have the look of someone who should." The men around him chuckled. The kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor, but habit the laughter of people who know it's safer to agree. I wanted to leave. My heart was beating so fast it hurt. But when I looked at him again, I saw something strange in his eyes. Not lust, not cruelty, curiosity. He reached into his jacket and slid a small ivory business card across the table. His voice was smooth, quiet, controlled. "Come to my office tomorrow. Noon. I'll make it worth your while." I didn't pick up the card. I didn't have to. I could already feel its weight in my mind, pressing down harder than the tray I was holding. When I walked away, my hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped a bottle of wine. Every step felt like the floor was tilting under me. I told myself I wouldn't go. I had rules, boundaries, dignity. But that night, lying awake in my small apartment, those things felt like luxuries I couldn't afford. The apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. My mother was asleep, her breathing shallow and uneven. The hospital had released her early not because she was better, but because I couldn't pay for another week. The eviction notice was still taped to the door. I'd folded it once, twice, but never thrown it away. It was my reminder every bill, every overdue notice, every final warning that life wasn't waiting for me to catch up. $7,000. That number pulsed in my head like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. I sat on the couch, scrolling through news articles about Luca Moretti. Every photo looked the same. Sharp suits, cold eyes, men flanking him who didn't smile. Headlines whispered the words business magnate, real estate developer, alleged connections. Alleged. Always that word safe, vague, untouchable. I stared at his photo until my phone dimmed. Something about him didn't fit the image of a criminal. There was calculation, yes, but also control. The kind of control you don't fake. I whispered to myself. You're not actually considering this. But I was. When you've spent your life watching things fall apart, sometimes the wrong offer sounds like a rescue. The next morning, I woke up to my mother coughing. I helped her take her pills, the ones I'd been stretching by breaking in half. She smiled weakly. "You're working too hard, Lena," she said, using the childhood nickname that always made me ache. "Promise me you'll rest today." I kissed her forehead and lied. "I will." On my way out, I hesitated at the door. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than 22 dark circles. Tired eyes. Determination. I didn't know if I was walking toward a job or a mistake, only that I couldn't afford to do nothing. The building was impossible to miss 40 stories of glass and marble that caught the morning light like a blade. Inside, everything smelled expensive. Leather, cologne, quiet money. The receptionist greeted me by name before I even said a word. That should have scared me more than it did. She smiled like she knew something I didn't, and motioned toward the elevator. "Mr. Moretti is expecting you." My palms were slick. I told myself I'd listen, say no politely, and leave. That was the plan. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into another world's sunlight, pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows. A skyline that made everything below look small. And there he was, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, like he owned the city. And maybe he did. "Miss Rossi," he said, turning toward me. You came. I forced a small laugh. You made it sound like a challenge. He smiled, slow and deliberate. Everything worth having is a challenge. The way he said it, not flirtatious, not playful, made my stomach tighten. He gestured to a seat. I sat, trying to look calm while my heartbeat echoed in my ears. There was no wine this time, no entourage, just him, a sleek desk, and the distant hum of the city below. I'm not sure what you want from me, I said finally. I need a translator, he replied. Italian to English. Short term. Legal business. You'd be compensated fairly. How fairly? He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. 7,000. For 1 hour. I stared at him. That's insane. He shrugged. Insane is just another word for unexpected. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or maybe both. And what if I say no? Then you walk out that door, he said simply, nodding toward the elevator. And we never speak again. He didn't pressure me. He didn't have to. The silence did all the talking. In that quiet, I thought about the hospital calling again. About my mother's thin wrists. About the way I'd been cutting corners and still losing ground. I should have said no. But when I opened my mouth, the word that came out wasn't no. It was, when do you need me? Something shifted in his expression. Approval. Maybe satisfaction. Tomorrow morning, he said. Bring your ID. I nodded, even as my pulse screamed that I was walking into something I didn't understand. He stood and offered his hand. Welcome to Moretti Enterprises. His handshake was warm, steady, but his eyes were unreadable. When I left, the receptionist gave me a smile that felt almost sympathetic. The elevator ride down was silent, but my mind wasn't. What kind of man pays that much for an hour of translation? What kind of woman says yes to him? As the doors opened into the lobby, the air felt heavier somehow. The city noise rushed in, filling the quiet he'd left behind. I clutched my purse, the business card tucked inside, burning against my skin like a secret I couldn't unlearn. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself it was just work, that tomorrow, I'd earn the money, pay the bills, and walk away. But deep down, I knew better. Men like Luca Moretti didn't invite you into their world just to let you leave. And women like me, we always think we can handle it, until it's too late. That night, I sat by my mother's bed and watched her sleep. Her breathing was shallow, her fingers twitching in restless dreams. I reached for her hand, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But my voice trembled on the word okay. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted things to go back to the way they were. The next morning, the city was washed clean by rain. The streets glistened, reflections stretching across puddles like mirrors of choices not yet made. As I stepped onto the subway, I caught my reflection in the glass, the same tired eyes, but something different behind them. Not fear, not hope, something sharper, curiosity. By the time I reached the building again, my decision felt less like a choice, and more like momentum. I straightened my jacket, wiped my palms, and walked through the revolving doors. The security guard nodded. The receptionist smiled. The elevator chimed. Each floor number lit up like a countdown one. I couldn't stop even if I tried. When the doors opened, I took a breath that didn't steady me at all, and stepped forward. And as they closed behind me, sealing me inside Luca Moretti's world, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Whatever this is, it's already too late to turn back. The first week I worked for Luca Moretti, I told myself it was just temporary. 1 hour became 1 day, then 1 week, then 2. Before I realized it, I was walking through the revolving doors of his glass tower every morning like I belonged there. He said it was translation work contracts, phone calls, meetings with Italian partners who trusted no one outside their own bloodlines. But it was never just words. Sometimes, the things I translated weren't what he said but what he meant. A smile that ended a negotiation. A silence that carried more weight than any threat. A nod that closed a deal none of us would ever talk about. The men around him treated him like gravity, something they couldn't escape, even if they wanted to. And me? I orbited quietly on the edge, pretending I wasn't being pulled closer every day. He didn't flirt, not at first. He didn't need to. He'd ask for my opinion during meetings. Small things at first, a tone, a phrasing, a translation choice. Then, One afternoon, he said, "You're the only one here who doesn't pretend to like me." I froze, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. He smiled slightly. "That's why I trust you." It was the first time I realized he noticed everything, not just the words, but the silences between them. I wanted to keep my distance, but there was something magnetic about him. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Power clung to him like a scent, subtle but impossible to ignore. Still, I told myself he was just my boss. Just a man who happened to sign my paychecks and make my pulse do strange things when he looked at me for too long. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. I liked the way I felt when I was near him, seen, capable, important. And that scared me more than anything. Late one night, the office was empty except for the two of us. The city outside looked like a sea of lights, endless and untouchable. I was reviewing documents when I noticed his reflection in the glass standing behind me. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up. "You should go home, Elena," he said quietly. "So should you." He smiled faintly. "I don't sleep much." "Why not?" I asked before I could stop myself. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he walked closer, resting one hand on the edge of my desk. "My father was betrayed by the man he trusted most," he said, his voice low, steady. "He thought loyalty could be bought. He was wrong." He didn't move. He continued, "Ice distant. When I was 15, I found him in his office alone, still holding a glass of whiskey. I promised myself I'd never be that weak, never give anyone that kind of power over me again. It wasn't what he said that hurted, it was how he said it. Without anger, without pity, just exhaustion." I swallowed hard. "That's a heavy way to live." He looked at me then. Really looked, the kind of gaze that pins you in place and strips away every lie. "It's the only way I know." For the first time, I saw past the perfectly tailored suits, the control, the armor. There was a boy in there, once bruised, frightened, left behind, who'd built an empire just to feel safe again. Something in me shifted that night. I stopped seeing him as a headline and started seeing the man behind it. And that was my mistake, because once you see someone's wounds, you can't unsee them. The attack happened 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday ordinary, until it wasn't. I was walking out of the office when my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from my mother's nurse. By the time I reached the clinic, smoke filled the air. Flames licked the sky. Sirens screamed. People ran in every direction. My heart stopped. Someone grabbed my arm, one of Luca's security men. "This way," he shouted over the chaos. I couldn't process it. I just followed, stumbling through the smoke, until I saw her, my mother, being carried out on a stretcher, coughing but alive. I fell to my knees beside her, shaking so hard I could barely hold her hand. She looked at me through tears. They said it was meant for someone else. And I knew exactly who. That night, I found Luca in his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear, voice calm but sharp as a knife. When he saw me, he ended the call immediately. For the first time, I saw something raw in his expression. Not control, not composure, guilt. "They were aiming for me," he said quietly. "Your mother's clinic was one of the charities under my name. They wanted to send a message." My throat tightened. A message that almost killed her. "I know." "Then why are you so calm?" I demanded. "Why aren't you angry?" He stepped closer. "Because anger doesn't fix things. I already fixed it. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. All I could do was stand there, trembling, the weight of everything sinking in." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You're not safe anymore, Elena." "I was never safe with you," I whispered. He looked away for a long moment, then said softly, "You're right." He told me his men were moving my mother to a secure facility under his protection. I should have refused. I should have screamed at him, told him to stay away. But instead, I said thank you. Because part of me, the part that was too tired to fight, believed he was the only one who could keep us safe. And maybe that was true. The rain came 3 nights later. Hard, relentless, washing the city clean of everything except the things that refused to be erased. We were at one of his safe houses, an old estate outside the city. Quiet except for the storm and the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the walls. I stood by the window, watching the downpour blur the world into grey. He was behind me, silent, watching me the way he always did, not possessive, not tender, just aware. Finally, he said, "You can walk away if you want." I turned to face him. "And go where?" He looked confused for the first time since I'd met him. "You've already changed everything," I said. "I can't go back to pretending I don't know who you are, or what you've done." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "You shouldn't have been part of this." "I'm part of this." My voice cracked. "You made sure of that." Lightning flashed again, bright enough to catch the tension in his eyes, the war between wanting me safe and wanting me close. "I don't know how to protect you," he admitted. "Not from this world. Not from me." "Then don't," I said. "Stop trying to protect me from choices I already made." For a moment, neither of us moved. The storm outside filled the silence between us, a rhythm of chaos that matched the one in my chest. Then he stepped closer. "You don't understand what being with me means." "I think I do," I whispered. His hand brushed my cheek, tentative, like he was touching something sacred he had no right to claim. And then, in a voice rougher than I'd ever heard, he said, "I've spent my life making sure no one could ever hurt me again. But you..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to, because I already knew. When his lips met mine, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate years of loneliness, anger, and restraint collapsing into a single moment. I tasted rain and fear, and the realization that everything had changed. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was a promise and a warning at the same time, the kind of moment you can't take back once it happens. When we finally broke apart, I pressed my forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady, strong, terrifyingly human. He whispered against my hair, "You shouldn't love me. I don't. Ilid." He smiled sadly. "You will." Outside, the thunder rolled across the sky like an omen. In that moment, I understood what he meant. Love wasn't my escape. It was the trap I'd been walking toward all along. That night, as the storm raged and the city slept, I realized something that both comforted and destroyed me at once. I wasn't afraid of Luca Moretti anymore. I was afraid of how much I needed him. I didn't see Luca for 2 weeks after the night of the storm. His people said he was handling things, which could mean anything or everything in his world. When he finally called, his voice was calm, measured, almost too careful. "Come to the tower," he said. "There's something you need to see." Part of me wanted to refuse. But the truth was, I'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. When I walked into his office, it was different, quieter, emptier. The shelves were half cleared, the walls stripped of the usual symbols of power. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city below. Not the man who ruled it, just a man looking at what he was about to leave behind. "You're shutting everything down," I said softly. He didn't deny it. "I built this empire to survive," he said. "To protect myself, my people, what was left of my father's legacy. But survival isn't living. And lately I've been thinking about what I'd leave behind if I stopped." I stepped closer. "And what do you want to leave behind?" He turned to face me. And for once, there was no mask, no charm, no authority, just truth. Something worth keeping. He walked to the desk and opened a file, blueprints, contracts, documents, covered in signatures and seals. Clinics, charities, community projects, all legitimate. I flipped through the pages, speechless. "You've been doing this quietly," I said. "For how long?" "Since before I met you," he admitted. "But you made me believe I could finish it." It was strange seeing a man who'd built a kingdom of fear now trying to build something that healed. And it hit me that maybe that was what love really was. Not perfection, not purity, but the courage to become someone better because of it. Together, we spent the next few weeks planning, transferring funds, finalizing deals. He trusted me with everything, the numbers, the strategy, the vision. For the first time, I wasn't translating for him. I was standing beside him. But change never comes without enemies. The night before the final transition, when the last of his old businesses were to be dissolved, his closest men turned against him. Paolo, his right hand for years, came to the penthouse with 3 others, faces hard, voices trembling with anger and disbelief. "You're destroying what we built," Paolo spat. "Everything your father died for." Luca stayed seated, calm as ever. "My father built a prison," he said. "Every day, wondering who would betray him next. I refused to live in that cell any longer." "You're betraying us," Paolo snapped. Before I could speak, Luca raised a hand, quiet but commanding. I'm offering you something better. Partnership in legitimate ventures. Consistent profits. No blood. No prison. One of the men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. Maybe they saw what I saw. That the power in him hadn't vanished. It had only changed direction. But Paolo shook his head. You're soft. She made you soft. Luca stood then, slow and deliberate, the air tightening around him. No, he said. She made me see the difference between fear and respect, between loyalty and love. He slid folders across the table, legal documents, contracts, clean exits for anyone who wanted them. Take them, he said, or walk away. But if you stay and fight, I won't fight back. That era ends tonight. They left. Not all of them, but enough to make the silence afterward feel heavy. I looked at him, waiting for anger, for regret, but instead, he exhaled the kind of breath you take when you finally stopped running. You won, I whispered. He shook his head. No, we did. And in that moment, I realized how far we'd both come from fear to faith, from survival to purpose. 3 years later, I stood at a podium, under a canopy of white lights, the sound of applause washing over me like waves. The plaque behind me read, "The Moretti Foundation for Autoimmune Research, named after my mother," whose photo hung by the entrance, smiling in the sunlight of a day she never got to see. Reporters took photos, investors shook hands, and somewhere in the front row, Luca watched me with quiet pride. He wore the same kind of suit he always did, but the man inside it was different, lighter somehow. When the ribbon was cut, he came to stand beside me, his hand brushing mine, a small gesture, but one filled with everything we'd survived. From $7,000 to forever, he murmured. I laughed softly, blinking away the tears. Not exactly how I thought that night would end. Neither did I, he said. But I've learned that the best things in life rarely go according to plan. The press cameras flashed as we stepped outside, sunlight spilling over the marble steps. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The fear, the guilt, the constant second-guessing gone. All that remained was this quiet certainty that we'd built something real. Not perfect, but real. He turned to me, expression thoughtful. Do you ever miss the chaos? I smiled. No. I think we had enough of that to last a lifetime. He reached for my hand again, fingers intertwining with mine. And as we walked down the steps together, I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who thought survival was the same as strength. I didn't recognize her anymore. Maybe that was the point. That night, after the gala, the city glittered outside our window. Not as something to conquer, but something to protect. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me. To new beginnings, he said. To second chances, I replied. We clinked glasses softly, the sound small but beautiful like closure. There was peace in that silence. Not the fragile kind that breaks under pressure, but the kind you earn after a long, impossible fight. He leaned back, watching me the way he always did, with quiet admiration that no longer carried the shadow of control. You changed everything, he said. I smiled. So did you. He shook his head gently. You gave me something I never had before. What's that? A reason to stop surviving. The words hit me harder than I expected, because they were mine too. As the city lights flickered like a heartbeat below us, I thought about all the versions of ourselves we'd left behind, the waitress and the mafia boss, the dreamer and the monster. 2 broken people who somehow managed to build something whole. I set down my glass and leaned into him, my voice barely a whisper. I used to think survival was everything, I said. Then I met a man who taught me what it meant to live. He kissed my temple, his arm around me, and for the first time since that night in the restaurant, I felt safe. Not because he could protect me, but because he didn't need to anymore. Outside, the city kept moving, cars, lights, strangers chasing their own desperate choices. But for us, time finally stood still. And somewhere between the chaos and the quiet, between love and redemption, we found what we'd both been searching for, all along: peace. If this story touched your heart, tell me what part stayed with you the most. Was it Elena's courage? Or Luca's redemption? I love reading your thoughts. Every comment helps me understand what kind of stories you want more of. So don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who believes love can change even the darkest soul. Your support means everything. It's what keeps these stories alive.